ክቡራት ተኸታተልትና ካብዚ ብምቕፃል ናይ ክብሪ ቅድምቲ ዋዕላ ኤሪሳት 2023 ተጣባቂ ሰብኣዊ መሰላት ቬኔሳ ፀሓይ ናብ መድረክ ይቀድማ።
So again, thank you, Erisat, for inviting me. Thank you for organizing this event, and thank you for the incredible work that you do through your platform. I think many of us who have seen the Eritrean human rights space for the past, decades, and have seen the shift that's happened in the past 5 years. And I think Erisat is one of the institutions, and I call it an institution because it's compared to many other platforms that exist. It has structure, it has all of these things that are necessary for this work to be long-term and sustainable. So I just want to start off by saying thank you. So the keynote speech is supposed to touch on the theme of the whole event. The event is called The Role of Media in Facilitating Change and Transition to Democracy. And so I wanted my speech to look at this question by posing questions to you and to myself. So the question I want to ask, or the questions I want to ask are, why is our movement not more successful? And what can we do to change that? And I want to look at that question through the lens of media. And I'm posing that question to the diaspora movement. I'm not asking why don't we have movements in Eritrea, not because that's not an important question, but because that requires a whole other set of questions and research that we don't really have the time to get into, but also that's not as much in our control as the diaspora is. So the purpose of this presentation is to look at the role of the diaspora and why our movement has not been as successful as it could have been. So to start off with my own story, and the first part of this question is, why are not more people involved? That's the first question I want to look at. And I think most of us can say with certainty that there are not even close to enough people who are involved in the movement for change in Eritrea from outside. And there are so many reasons for that. And I think, again, I won't be able to look at all of the reasons, but using media as a lens, I want to look at least one of the reasons. So I'm going to start off with my own story. I was born in Sweden. My uncle is a journalist called Tsehaye, one of the journalists profiled here in this beautiful exhibition. He was imprisoned in 2001 alongside all these other journalists, 9 other journalists who were imprisoned very shortly after they shut down the free press. And I was 5 years old at the time when he was in prison. I wasn't living in Eritrea, I was living in Sweden. And so when I talk about how I became an activist, it wasn't because I was forced to become an activist because of circumstances, because of people. It was by choice. I chose to become an activist because from how I perceived the situation in Eritrea, it was one that was in crisis. It was something that it really gave birth to a deep sense of urgency within me as I was learning about what was happening in my country, as I was connecting what was happening in my country to what happened to my uncle. And as I was growing up, I really, really felt that this is, a fire. My country's on fire. Of course, we have to do something. So one thing I will never forgive the Eritrean diaspora for is not sharing that sense of burning urgency. And I think the question I want to ask is not to say exceptionalize my own feelings or that I'm a great person, but what made me different from other people who I grew up with, for example. And I think I became an activist 10 years ago, and it was impossible to find other young people who wanted to get involved. I know not everyone supported the Eritrean government, but not supporting a horrible dictatorship is not the same thing as getting involved and trying to do something about it. I think not supporting it is step one, and that's the least we can expect. And from that, I knew a few. So that's, we're setting the bar really low here. And then beyond that is who want to get involved. I remember a few girls who were getting involved at the time. There were maybe 3 of them, and a few guys. They were in a group. But apart from that, in Sweden, there wasn't any from my generation of people who were born there. So by looking at this, why do people not want to get involved? It's not to give an excuse. It's not to say, we're going to look at the media, right? So I'm not going to say they're all brainwashed and, they have a heart. We're looking at this with a basis that they don't care. And that's not something that we should just accept. That's something that we really should interrogate and that we really should hold each other accountable about. If we're seeing activists getting involved this year, I sound a bit vindictive. I think it's important for us to interrogate this. Why have we not cared? Why have we not felt that what's happening in Eritrea is so urgent that we should get involved. You know, when California wildfires were happening, it was no question. People were saying this is a crisis. We need to do something about this. Why have the Eritrean diaspora not felt the same about Eritrea? And not just about Eritrea, but what's happening to Eritrean refugees across the world. On this border here in the United States, not very far away from here, on our borders in Europe, across East Africa, across the Middle East, even Australia. There's not a point in the world that hasn't been touched by Eritrean refugee suffering. So why don't we feel that burning sense of urgency? And so by looking at this again, we can learn something, hopefully. Not to give them an excuse, but to understand and hopefully learn something from that and see what we can do differently moving forward. I will be looking at this through media again. So this is not the only explanation. I think there's so many, you can look at psychology and all of these thoughts that can help understand, but we will be looking at it using the media. So let's step back, going away a little bit from Eritrea. What we think is important doesn't come in a vacuum. We aren't just born and we think certain people or certain individuals, groups are more important than others. There are a few things I can say boil down to like innate feelings of importance, and that's our family, our friends, our neighbors, maybe people that we know, people who, if something happens to them, we will be affected. If my siblings pass away, I will personally be affected. I will lose someone in my life, so I care. But everything beyond that is up for debate. Who we care about beyond that immediate circle of people is not something necessarily that is decided. It's something that could be up again for debate. So to give an example, I really care about what happens in my neighborhood in Sweden because I know those people, and when a crime happens in Sweden, I think it could have been me. So even though I care because I know some of them, it's also a sense of selfishness. That could have been me, or that could be my brother or my sister if something happens. And as soon as you hear something, you read the news and it says it was in, I don't know, a country far away, your sense of panic kind of lowers down a little bit because you don't know people there, but also because you don't really connect to people in Bangladesh, maybe. You don't connect people the same way in China, maybe, but you connect to people in some kind of way in Australia, in Canada, in the UK, and these are countries that I have no real connection to, but why do I care more what is happening in those countries and not in others? And so I think the media plays a crucial role in helping us determine what is and what is not important to us. It helps us shape our value system, our opinions, our priorities. And I also want to use this opportunity to expand on the definition of media. And I think it was done really well in the panel, but I really want to go a step further and not just limit our conversation to journalists and journalism. In addition to that, and I think that is one of the most important part of the media, I really want to look at media and culture as like a broader set of institutions, social media, TV shows, fictional TV shows, fictional films, documentaries, podcasts, music, art, all of these art forms that help us shape what is important, what isn't, what do we value, what do we not value, what brings out a sense of urgency in us and what doesn't. So dictatorships know this. They know this way better than any of us do. It's why they restrict this as the first step of taking control in certain countries where they exist. So in Eritrea, for example, that was the first thing that went. The Eritrean Free Press was the first thing that was shut down. And then they imprisoned the politicians, then they imprisoned journalists, and then slowly they started imprisoning the poets, they started imprisoning the singers. There are no institutions in Eritrea that can shape opinions because they have all disappeared or they've been forbidden to even start existing. I sometimes sound like a conspiracy theorist when I talk about Abraham Afwerki, but I find it very difficult to believe that the most important cultural figure in Eritrean history that was in the hearts of the entire youth population in Eritrea, that would have been the population to take over the country if they were just told the right thing at the right time, suddenly died. I'm not saying I'm a conspiracy theorist or I know what happened. I have absolutely no proof, but looking at how dictatorships operate, they shut down people with power, and that power isn't just political. It's not just journalists. It's cultural. Who gets paid the most in Hollywood? Who gets paid the most in all of these places? You could be a Hollywood star and you can be appointed a UN ambassador. They don't know anything about refugee issues or whatever because they hold cultural capital. And so I think by looking at how are these thoughts formed, again, we can start understanding a little bit more about what matters and what doesn't. And I mean, speaking of Hollywood, just looking at how cultural power is used, it's not just in dictatorships. This happens everywhere. And I want to use the US as an example. Hollywood, if they want to make a film about any war, they make all these massive, I don't like war films, not because I'm against, I just don't find them interesting, but a lot of people do. And some of the biggest blockbusters are like biggest and most blockbusters, thank you, are, it's very an American term, I'm not from here, are made about wars. And to have the permission to use weapons and to use specific things that are impossible to buy as a studio. It doesn't make any sense to buy all these very expensive war materials. They get to borrow them from the Ministry of Defense and from the Pentagon. And this is all well-recorded evidence. But obviously, to do that, there are certain requirements. And so this is their way of controlling what is said about wars in the United States. There has, if I'm not mistaken, very rarely have ever been made a film critical of the war using war. And it's very difficult to make an engaging film without using those equipments and without having permission, again, of the Ministry of Defense or the Pentagon. And you can make a film about an activist fighting the war, but how engaging is that really? Real change and real manipulation happens when we don't know it, when we don't think about who we see on TV, when we don't think about, you don't choose to watch a documentary. If you look at how many people watch documentary, how many people watch the fictionalized version of those events that were shown in the documentary, the other one always does better because that's more susceptible to more people. And so all of these institutions have been held hostage in Eritrea. And this is the same thing in many other places where media institutions, cultural institutions are restricted and held hostage to favor the people in power, whoever those people might be, whether those in politics, in finance, in business, whatever it is, cultural and media institutions are always connected to that. So how does this connect to Eritrea? I'll use one more example before I get to Eritrea. And I know it's sounding like I'm talking about other theories and stuff, but it's all connected, I promise. Ukraine is one of my favorite examples of this. The easy way of describing the world's reaction to Ukraine, I think, is by saying they care about them because in Europe. I don't think it's that simple. I think we all have biases. I think the way that we can form who we care about, who we don't care about, is by using our primary biases to then build upon that and manipulate that. So yes, we have a bias for people in Europe. And that's not just white people. We all do. When something happens in Europe, when something happens in the US, the world, and that's the entire world, cares more. And that's for so many reasons. The US has the biggest cultural capital in the world. Everyone knows about American culture, about American high schools. Even we have no interest or whatever, it's all we see on TV. Most of our TV shows growing up in Sweden, where I grew up, were about the United States. So we care when things happen here. Ukraine and the kind of global mobilization around Ukraine was primarily centered in a project to build connection to the people in Ukraine. So I don't know how it is here in the US, but in Europe, especially in the United Kingdom where I'm based, Ukrainians had a very bad reputation before the war. They were always perceived, and in the media specifically, perceived as in the most, industries that, are not seen as positive. And they were not seen as us. The Brexit movement, in fact, was centered around Eastern Europeans and demonizing Eastern Europeans. I know for sure, and this was well documented across the media, that they experienced high level of racism across the country in the UK after Brexit, for example, or during the Brexit movement. So they didn't necessarily they weren't seen as white as Western Europeans, and most of Eastern Europe is seen in the same way. So what happened during the war, in my opinion, and I think from other people's analysis as well, is that there was a push from political powers who wanted to get involved in Ukraine, who had their own incentives pushing back Russian influence in Ukraine and Russian influence overall. And there became a project to make Ukrainians like us. And across the media, if you look at TV pundits, if you look at op-eds that were written, if you look at the coverage of the Ukrainian society and culture before the war, there was an active effort to make it look like Ukraine is another country in Europe, just like us, and if Russia invades them, they can invade us too, and therefore we need to care about Ukraine. There was an article at the BBC, a good friend of mine works at the BBC, he covers the front page, so he makes sure that the things with the best hits or anything that he thinks is important goes on the front page. And he always talks about this article about the techno scene in Ukraine before the war, and how it was one of the best hitting pieces on the BBC ever, and in context of the Ukrainian war, of course. And we discussed this for many times, and the conclusion we reached was that people in the UK, they can see, one of our biggest cultures is drinking and partying. And we just don't know what people do in other places. And when we can't connect to people in Sudan, even me as an Eastern, I don't know what everyday life looks like in Sudan. I don't know how to make a distinction between war and pre-war, because pre-war to me is empty. So when war happens in countries where we don't know how they lived before, it's as if we just say it's a continuation of suffering. And the way we perceive Africa most of the time is it's just a continuation of suffering. There was a coup before this war. Before that war, there was a massacre. Before that massacre, there was a 30 whatever plus year dictatorship. It's just a continuing suffering. But within those pieces of suffering, there is life. And without having an understanding of how that life existed, that disconnect that we felt disappears. Or the disconnect that never existed disappears even more. And so I use Ukraine as an example where we manufactured connection, a place that many people had no connection to, and if they did, had mostly negative, became one of us, became another European country. And the techno example is a good one, but it's also sad that we have to use a more Western European form of entertainment or existence to form connection. It could have been as easy as just following high school students, before and asking them, what were you doing in high school? Adolescents all over the world share the same struggles, we have the same hormones, whatever it is. People can make connections through that, but this is how we work, unfortunately. And so now we bring it back to Eritrea. We are all Eritreans in this room, well, most of us, and we're all Eritreans, the Eritreans who are living in Eritrea, the Eritreans who are living outside of Eritrean Africa, here, whatever. But we cannot say that we treat each other the same, and we cannot say that we view each other the same either. And I say that myself as well, who's someone who actively tries to treat Eritreans as the same, but I don't. And where does that come from? Is it just me? Is it just my generation? Or is it all Eritreans who have lived outside of Eritrea for a very long time? My theory around this is, again, not comprehensive. I don't think that this is the only reason Eritreans don't get engaged, but I think it's a very important thing that we need to look at, especially if we want to understand how we see each other, especially if we want to find a way of coexisting in a future democratic Eritrea. We need to recognize how we view each other, why, and what we can do about it. Even after my parents' generation came to Europe, so my parents came during the war for independence. So they were born in Eritrea, they grew up in Eritrea. A lot of the people who support the Eritrean government are from that generation. I know there's a massive group as well that are Eritrean refugees themselves, and I will get into that later. But this is about the diaspora, more like established diaspora. But if something happens to an Eritrean living in the United States, Eritreans in Sweden, Germany, the UK will mobilize for that person or for those group of individuals. If Eritreans, a group of Eritrean, let's say a group of Eritrean high school students went missing and they were found drowned just by accident, they would be held as vigils across the world. I can say that for certain. If Eritreans in the United States were killed by US Border Patrol on the border or drowned because of something in the US, I can assure you that Eritreans all over the world will come together and say, this is not about politics, we're going to have to come together to help these people. But when Eritreans are drowning in the Mediterranean Sea, when they're dying in other places, when they're starving in other countries, where do we disconnect? Why don't we feel the same thing? And it's because we, in many ways, view Eritreans who are born and raised in Eritrea and who've recently come out the same way a lot of white people view people of color in other countries. We don't feel connected to them. We see them as other. We call them freshies. We make fun of their accents. We make fun of how they do their hair. We feel a disconnect from these people. And by creating a disconnect, it's easier to not care. And I can take it a step further. It's easier not to care, but it's also easier to sacrifice people you don't really feel connected to. When the United States invades other countries, do you think the United States could invade Canada and get away with what they're doing and if they would have done the same thing they did in other countries in Asia or Africa, if they did that in Canada, do you think they would get away with that? No, there's no way, because people in the United States feel more connected to people in Canada. They see them as themselves. They would maybe ask more questions. Maybe they would get away with it, but they would ask more questions. They would have more, so why are we doing this? What's happening? But with people that you don't care about as much, people you don't feel connected to, for whatever reason, it is easier to get away with it. When Isaiah says he wants to invade, actually he didn't say that. When Isaiah invaded Tigray and lied about it for months and then ended up continuing doing that for several years, we as a community, yes, many of us spoke up, but a vast majority of Eritreans didn't. Why? Because their children weren't there. And these are people who were born in Eritrea, people who were raised in Eritrea and then left afterwards. But they are in many ways also Americans. They are in many ways also Europeans because they've lived here. Culturally, they also see themselves as superior. And for me, that is one of the biggest problems. And yes, we have these biases, and that's what I'm saying. I'm not saying I am completely the same, and like, you know, even if you look at the disconnect between people who are born in Europe, in the United States, we get along. I have many friends who are Eritreans who are living, you know, born and raised in other Western societies, who I have much more in common with than I have with Eritreans who are born in Eritrea who recently left. There's also disconnect with levels of trauma. There was much discussion in the panel prior about missed out years. You know, people, I'm 27, I've experienced so many different things, I've been to, 2 different universities, lived in 3 different countries. I've been able to do a lot of things that has created commonalities with a lot of other people who have had similar experiences. And if I meet an Eritrean who has spent the past 10 years in Sudan, before that 5 years in Ethiopia, and now I've come here, we don't have as much in common. And I think there are, in addition to our biases, the lack of shared experiences is also something that creates a bigger divide. But I'm willing to acknowledge that. I don't have any, I think, Eritrean friends who were born and raised in Eritrea. I don't. But I also don't have many Eritrean friends. You know, but that aside, there is a disconnect between us and them. And I think instead of saying, no, we're all Eritreans, it doesn't matter, we need to acknowledge it, and we need to look at how that impacts our movement. So whilst we can acknowledge that this is happening, it doesn't mean that that's okay. I always go back to my uncle, who is my biggest hero, who I think is one of Eritrea's biggest heroes. And in an interview that he did with a German journalist who asked him, what are your goals with your journalism in Eritrea? He was the founding director of Eri TV, who we all know as the station it is today, but it wasn't always like that, especially when he was running it. Because of course, it's a state institution that was taken over by the dictatorship as a propaganda tool. And he said, one of my main goals is to create a connection between people living here and people living outside of Eritrea. I want them to get to know each other. I want to start liking each other so that when we need it, we can help each other. And I always stick to that sentence that he said at the end, when we need it, we can help each other. That was started with, we can get to know each other. Because if we don't get to know each other, why are we going to help each other? And Eritreans don't not care, and how do I explain this? It's not that Eritreans don't care about people in Eritrea. They care about their family. They send money to their family. They make sure that their family is okay because they like their family, and they have an obligation. In our culture, we don't, you know, abandon our family members. That's something very beautiful. But beyond that, as a community, and that's what I was talking about, neighbors. Neighbors is not a granted. Your family is a granted. You always care about your family unless you're a psychopath or unless they hurt you. You shouldn't care about people who hurt you. But if you are a human being and you have a family, you will care about them. But beyond that, we don't help them. And we also need to look at what is the experiences of Eritreans living in Eritrea and Eritrean refugees who don't have family abroad. It's not everyone who does. And most of the people we speak to that we work with in One Day Seum, which I haven't introduced yet, but I'll talk about it later, or even at Amnesty International, where I'm also working, are Eritreans who don't have anyone. And if you look at Sudan now, almost 6 months after the war started, who is left in Sudan? And anyone here who's working on Sudan knows this. Anyone who had even a slight connection abroad to the diaspora has been evacuated out. All they needed was cash to get out of Khartoum. From Khartoum, they went to the eastern side. From there, most of them have gone to Uganda or to Ethiopia. But the people who are left are the people who have no one. And so when we say, you know, everyone helps their own family, that's not enough, because there are many people whose parents or who family members were killed in the war that, you know, gave birth to our country, our heroes, our martyrs. They have been abandoned more than anyone. So it is important that we build a connection beyond our immediate familiar connections that already exist. And so another journalist who spoke to Seum also prior to he was imprisoned, an American, South African journalist who's a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist, photo photographer who met Seum. He described him in an interview that I did with him and said that he was, you know, all these incredible things. He was charismatic, he was funny, he was all, you know, a very good person, right? But then he said, most importantly, he had the tools to tell stories that could cover what was happening and that could convince other people. And that's why he was imprisoned. And that's why I want to get to the next step, acknowledging that we have biases here in the diaspora. We don't see them as the same. But what can we do about that? And so obviously the Eritrean government dismantled any institutions, imprisoned away any people who could build those connections. And not just saying connections because we don't care about them, but even thinking, oh, it's so bad in Eritrea, but what's actually happening? Imagine if we had human interest stories coming straight from Eritrea, showing the conditions at the national service camps, showing the conditions at the minefields, showing the conditions in national service places all over the country, interviews with people who have disappeared. I, in my role at Amnesty International, where I worked for almost 3 years, have never got a single person to speak on record from Eritrea, not once. We haven't produced research on Eritrea in I don't know how many years, because we can't get people to speak to us. This is an active effort by the Eritrean government to create a disconnect from what's happening in the country and outside. To get people in Africa to speak on record about what's happening, what happened to them in Eritrea, is extremely difficult. Why? Because the Eritrean government controls many of the communities that exist outside of Eritrea as well. So it's not easy. It's not because we're lazy. It's an active, intentional effort by the Eritrean government to create a disconnect between the stories on the ground and between the people and us. And we care about people. We don't care about statistics. You can say how many times crimes against humanity is happening in Eritrea, how many times crimes against humanity is happening, against refugees. It doesn't mean that much unless you put stories to it, unless you have a face to it. And that has intentionally been taken away from them. And so our job in the diaspora is to create those connections again, make it relevant, make those stories heard, and be innovative. We don't have those stories on the ground. We can create them here. There are how many refugees who have come here? And it might have been a while since they left, but I'm sure many of them will speak about it. And they are, and they're speaking about it. Many of them have their own platforms. Many of them are telling their own stories, and it's really important. And I think it is important when we're having these discussions to acknowledge mistakes, but also to acknowledge successes. And we've had such successes in the past 5 years. I'd say, if you want to give it a time, especially since the peace deal in 2018, there's been massive improvements. But there's still much more to be done. And I think if we look at the platforms that exist, a lot of them have convinced a lot of people, but a lot of them have still been left out. And I think it's also important to not pretend we're all one Eritrean people and we all have the same ways of being spoken to, or we have the same ways of being engaged. I will very shamelessly plug that I think One Museum has done an excellent job in engaging diaspora-born Eritreans. Why? Because I'm diaspora-born Eritrean, and I know how, going back to how we all exist in different ways, we have a shared experiences. We consume the same kind of social media content. We follow the same kind of people on social media. There's a reason why social media pages like Salam Central or Buna something, I forgot what they're calling, they're discontinued now. They used to have hundreds of thousands of followers, and they were not based in one country. They had followers in all diaspora, Western diaspora communities. Why? Because they know how to speak our language. We make fun of our parents and how they speak to us. We make all of these shared experiences that we have wherever we are. They know how to speak to us. So our media needs to be able to do the same. And our organization has been doing that, primarily speaking to diaspora Eritreans, but also just any younger generation that wants to get involved. And so we can't forget to be more specific in our efforts as well. We can't expect, even language matters. So in addition to Tigrinya speaking channels, we mostly do English speaking work to reach that audience. And there are many other languages in our culture, in our country that aren't being platformed, and those communities aren't being engaged. And that creates resentment. Not only is it just not engaging people, but it creates resentment, and it tells them that they don't matter. And that's across ethnic groups, but it's also for young people. And I've said this before, young people in the Eritrean diaspora movement don't feel like they have a space. And I get countless messages from people saying, I didn't even think I could be involved until I saw your work. I didn't think there was a space for me if I didn't speak Tigrinya, for example. And that's why representation matters, not just because everyone deserves to be heard, but because it encourages other people to feel like they have a space, to feel like that they also can get involved. And it shows the multitude of the Eritrean identity that will exist now in our movement and will continue to exist in our country when it becomes truly independent and democratic. Another thing I'll say in terms of convincing people is that it's not easy. It's not a one-off, you make one YouTube channel or one video or one campaign and people will suddenly start caring. It's also not enough because we've waited so long to do it. This active dehumanization of Eritreans who are born in Eritrea and raised in Eritrea, the active dehumanization of Eritrean refugees has been done for a very long time. The silencing of their stories beyond the suffering. We don't know much about, what's life like in Eritrea. Obviously, it's not great. But what are the good things? Like, what gives you joy? Like seeing those videos of young people dancing to Abba Maforki is one of my favorite things because it's the shared experience. Most young people have been to a concert, seeing someone they love and going absolutely crazy. Those are the experiences that aren't being shared because we don't have a functioning cultural and media climate in Eritrea. And if they are, it's controlled by the government. It's all propaganda. So for us to do that, we need to think very strategic. We need to think very long term. And whatever we do, we need to be thinking about who we're targeting. thinking about your audience is the most important thing as a media platform. And I say media again, expanded, whether that's a TikTok channel, YouTube channel, journalistic platform. We need to think about who we're targeting. And going back to the issue about what do we talk about? It's not enough to talk about crimes against humanity over and over again. It's not enough to talk about how do we achieve change in Eritrea over and over again. What do normal Eritreans know about life in Eritrea? And when I say life, again, I'm not talking about what I said about what's life in high school. Water. How do you get water in Eritrea? Most people, and for my generation, have no idea about the water crisis in Eritrea, about the electricity crisis in Eritrea, about the food crisis in Eritrea, all that have been manufactured by the Eritrean government. If anything, those are the kind of stories that will move people. If you take the most basic needs and you remove them, most people can identify with that. If you start saying, if you speak up against the government, you'll disappear. Most people, at least in Europe, don't really speak up against the government. In the US, it's a bit more, protest culture is stronger. There's a stronger disconnect between the governments here. We don't really have an active political culture. So just going on about journalists who've disappeared is really important, of course, but will it change the apathetic kind of part of the Eritrean population? Probably not. So we need to speak about more kind of issues. We speak about issues affecting women. We don't speak about that enough. We don't speak about issues affecting disabled people in Eritrea, children in Eritrea. And why? It's because most of the people who have space in the Eritrean community are men, middle-aged men. And middle-aged men speak about the issues that affect middle-aged men mostly. And that's the case across cultures. It's not just the Eritrean community. I'm not pointing out us as standing out. This is the norm. This is how the media works in all places. So with more diversity, with more representation, more issues will also be covered in our reporting, and that will help more people find out about the multitude of the Eritrean crisis. Because it's not even saying, this thing is worse than the other. It's saying, can you imagine this is bad, but this is also bad, and this is also bad, and this is also bad. One of our most successful pieces, we did a blog post, a video, and a social media event about it, was the food crisis in Eritrea, the hunger crisis, how it affected. And people were shocked. And we outlined the reasons for why a lot of things were happening in terms of the food crisis. And we made it very accessible. We interviewed people who had left Eritrea. We even interviewed people in Eritrea. But that was with one big team. It wasn't with amnesties. People didn't feel as scared to speak to us. That moved a lot of people. And I learned something from that. And that was to really think about how we use media better and expand beyond just speaking about certain issues. Because, if you look at even why hasn't the United Nations investigated the crimes against humanity related to socioeconomic issues, for example? Because socioeconomic issues globally are not seen as considered as standard human rights issues. That's a new wave of the human rights movement that has started later. It's obviously connected to money. It's connected to corporations, because once we start claiming socioeconomic rights, who's supposed to give us that? What is that got to do with, human rights doesn't cost anything. Imprisoning people and releasing them doesn't cost anything. But ensuring socioeconomic rights costs something. And that's why it's not globally spoken about. But we can be better, and we don't have to follow those rules and be held accountable to corporations the same way that our governments in Western countries are. So all of that to say is that we should be more strategic, and we need to also be strategic with how we engage with other media organizations and media institutions. Not just how the media we produce, but the media that we engage in terms of, how is Eritrea covered in the press? If you look up Eritrea, what comes up? And I want to use two examples to speak about that. The peace deal in 2018, most of us didn't see it as a positive thing. As soon as it happened, most of us had a feeling this was not going to go to any change in Eritrea. This was not going to, change anything. How did the international press cover it? Eritrea is about to become free. What did the journalists ask me? Are you excited your uncle's about to be released? And I went absolutely crazy. And I think some of you might remember, I was constantly tweeting, constantly doing interviews on TV and radio, writing op-eds, doing my very best to change the narrative around the peace deal. And I wasn't alone. Many other Eritreans did the same thing. And we managed to really shift the narrative around what was happening with the peace deal. And when Abiy Ahmed won the Peace Prize in 2019, we continued shifting that narrative and continued really changing how the media viewed it. And we weren't 100% successful. The media continued to speak about Abiy as a great person until the day the war in Tigray started. They're like, how could we have been so wrong? We were telling you, and we weren't successful, but we tried. And I think that should give us, some hope that if we do better next time, if we're more people next time, maybe the next time the press can talk about us differently. The second example I want to use is about the recent protests that have been happening with the festivals across the world. how are these protesters being framed in the international press? Are they terrorists or are they freedom fighters? Terrorists, right? They are seen as crazy, not just them actually, because of the international press. And if you look at, I was actually at the protests in Sweden. They were framed, both sides were framed as refugees who were fighting each other. They didn't even get the agency to be terrorists. They didn't even get the agency to have some kind of something they were fighting for. But they were definitely not freedom fighters. And I remember I did an interview with Tsehaye, who's an activist based in Sweden. Some of you might know her, she's brilliant, with the largest newspaper in Sweden. And I remember the journalist off the record was like, wow, I really had no idea about any of this. Like, we explained the situation, we explained the divide, we explained what these people were fighting for, we explained the trauma many of them have. We explained the fact that most of the people who were protesting, and I looked around that day of the protest, I'd say 95% of the people there had been personally affected by the crimes of the Eritrean government. People were angry. People were fighting for themselves. They were fighting for the years that they had lost, for the people they had lost, for the dreams and hopes that they had lost. People were angry, but that's not how they were framed at all. And there was an opportunity there to write op-eds, to change the narrative, to organize, spoke people across the world to go on these radio shows, to pitch ourselves. Hey, can you do a segment? It was hot news at the time, but that effort wasn't made. So we didn't learn as much from the 2018 peace deal as we could have, but that doesn't mean that we can't learn moving forward. So all of that having very long, I think I got 30 minutes, but I don't know how long I am at this point. The first step of the keynote of the presentation is, again, why are not more people involved? And again, I say that around the disconnect a lot of people in the diaspora feel. And then the final thing is the press doesn't just affect the international community, it affects Eritreans as well. And I made a video after the protest in Stockholm where I was there with my mom and many other people that I had known for a very long time, and we were detained by the police for 6 hours. And I posted a video straight after I came home saying, so many people, and I saw them, and I saw these people saying, I don't want to be political, I'm not political when it comes to Eritrea, but violence is never okay. Really? So you have nothing against violence happening in Eritrea. You have nothing against Eritreans being killed. I mean, we're not even talking about, I'm not saying any other kind of violence is okay, but killed, sexual violence, there are conditions in Eritrea that have been reported as sexual slavery by the United Nations. Sexual slavery, that is violence at the highest degree. And who knows what happened to those girls and women and boys and men after? Who knows? Who knows about the mental health issues that comes? So the violence that we speak about in the diaspora and the violence that's happening in Eritrea does not even compare. And the fact that people choose to speak out against the violence in one place but not the other, again reflects who are we willing to inflict violence upon. What people are saying here is that why are you attacking innocent people just trying to attend a festival? Why is an innocent person trying to attend a festival who is a supporter of the Eritrean government considered more worthy to you than an innocent person in Eritrea just trying to exist? And that's where the disconnect comes from. And this is not just because of our own biases, it's not just because of the intentional efforts by the Eritrean government to completely destroy any kind of media and cultural institutions. It's also the effect of the silence in the international press and the narratives that the international press is spreading. Because when we don't have our own platforms, when we don't have anything else left, what we have is CNN, Al Jazeera, BBC, all of these platforms. And when they fail us too, that's when we don't have any hope. But at the very least, we have each other, right? And we have our own platform. So I'm not saying all hope is lost, but we need to understand that the environment we're working in. We're not going to convince people by doing a one-off or two-off event. And that's why an institution that is long-term, that's sustainable, is the only way to go forward. And that's one of the reasons I was thanking ERISAT earlier. It's a long piece of work. And what I said before as well is that the Eritrean government is one of the most successful propaganda machines in the world. Because the only thing, they did the simplest thing you can do, the smartest thing you can do, they removed everything. They don't even have to have good arguments. Right now, there's actually no real argument for what's happening in Eritrea. At least before the war, before the peace deal, at least they had Tsehaye as a scapegoat. Now there's nothing. Now it's kind of a vague reference to the international community, like a vague pointing fingers at the West. But there's nothing, but it's easy to have nothing when you have been in control for so long. And I don't want us to underestimate the strength of the Eritrean propaganda machine. I'm very against the demonization of Eritrean refugees who are supportive of the Eritrean government. And I don't have enough time to speak about it properly, but I don't think we have any right to live here and speak about the propaganda machine in Eritrea, to speak about how much the Eritrean government controls all segments of Eritrean society, and then be surprised when they have succeeded. Their whole job was to blame everything happening in Eritrea on Tsehaye. And not only did people in Eritrea fall for it who had access to almost no other news media sources, or no critical thinking, no proper educational institutions, and most of the people who didn't even continue school after they were 17. But the international press fell for it. They said themselves, international institutions, the United Nations, the Nobel Peace Prize Committee said, because the war is over in Ethiopia, now change might happen in Eritrea. Going back to the same excuse the Eritrean government had used, that's how successful they had been able to disseminate their arguments. And yes, many of us can say, no, that's stupid. Of course, that's not the case. And that's what I was saying. I mean, how can you really believe that? But don't underestimate the power of propaganda, the power of media, the power of cultural institutions being held hostage by the government. It can convince people to believe even what seems unbelievable. And especially when their education institutions have been dismantled the way Eritrea has been, where people don't hold many critical thinking skills to the same level that they would have had if they weren't there. And so with that being said, these institutions matter, all of them, not just the traditional media institutions, but all of them. And it's our job to find ways of using them effectively. So the second question is, why have the people we have engaged, the people that now are informed, why have they not been mobilized better? And I think that goes back to what was said in the panel. We need leaders, but more importantly than leaders, we need institutions. Leaders are just people can come and go, people can get tired, people can burn out. Institutions last. And if we don't invest into institutions in our opposition, because that's what we are, we can't be neutral. It's not about, I'm an independent, I'm just talking about human rights, not politics. No, this is political. We are in opposition. We need to be invested in. And not just money. We need training, we need support, we need intergenerational support, as Mary was talking about, and we also need outside support. We can get people who have fought the same battle we have fought in other countries. We have, how much time do I have? We can get support from other places. So even if we succeed with even if we get 1 million Eritreans involved all over the world, it will mean nothing unless we mobilize them properly. And this is not just civil society organizations, human rights organizations, even media organizations have a role to play. Even journalism isn't just independent. It doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's all connected into other issues as well. So what we need is to find ways of, I don't want to use the word manipulate, I want to find ways of informing more people, engaging more people, making more people feel the sense of burning urgency that many of us in this room have felt about the Eritrean situation for a long time, to remind ourselves that the Eritrean propaganda machine is powerful, and it's not going to be easy because they have been at it for longer than we had. They've been at it with more resources than we have, but we can do it if we do it strategically. And secondly, if we want to engage them meaningfully, and if we want to have real change, then we need to invest into our movement. And so the second part, and this is my final point, is about democratic transition. And I actually didn't put much for democratic transition because to me, it's all the same. There's no difference between the movement now and what we're going to be existing. We're not going to go from having 5 men on the panel and only 1 woman to suddenly when the democratic transition happens, we're going to have 50-50 and become this perfect entity. That's not going to happen. So what we do now will influence how the next stage looks like. And it will be centered around the same principles, around empathy, about understanding, around having meaningful institutions, long-term institutions, about having representation. Whatever I said about the first part of the stage, stage towards the future where we want to have a democratic Eritrea, will look the same in the democratic transition. So my final point is that I think we need to remember why the Eritrean government shut down the free press, and we need to remember how important dictatorships and democracies across the world view media and cultural institutions, and we need to take them back from the hostage that they've been held in, and we need to use them to liberate our people. So, thank you so much.